Our only point of assisting the students right now is ensuring that together with SRC we negotiate with the institution some sort of flexible payment plan. What I mean is either having a cap on how much students must at least pay off in terms of their debt for self-funded students in order for them to proceed to register. Beyond that, it's also seeing what payment plan can work that allows the students to register and then go on to pay off the debt, whatever they owe, or the registration fees later on. Because we know that the registration fees are extremely high, especially for institutions like NUST that have a semester-by-semester registration, unlike UNAM where you register once off. At NUST right now, the cap is 4,500. Say that for students who owe the institution or whatever the case may be, must at least pay 4,500. This amount, of course, is inclusive of the registration fees and the deposit on the tuition fees. So this is the best gamble we could possibly get in terms of what students can afford right now. But we are aware that there are still students who cannot afford that amount, and the plan right now is to ensure that the institution at least gives some sort of grace or extends the registration period to allow the students to register, or at least adopt some sort of payment plan to say, okay, you're going to register regardless whether you can afford it or not, and then this is the plan that you're going to pay $1,000 per month or $500, whatever the plan is. But right now, this is the predicament we find ourselves in terms of registration fees in the middle of the year.
The Namib University of Science and Technology twice a year registration system has caused financial strain for many students. Why has NANSO not actively pushed for this system to be reviewed or challenged?
We have pushed for this system to be reviewed and challenged. The only issue is it becomes, or from the management side, it becomes very difficult to change the system as quickly as we'd want it to be changed because of the administrative nature of this process. It's not just a process that exists for the sake of existing, but you'd want to ensure that your students are registering at the beginning of the year, and you also want them to continue registering. Unlike UNAM where you register once off, that once off fee is inclusive of your first semester and your second semester. NUST breaks it down, so you run the risk of having students pay a large amount of money at the beginning of the year rather than paying it in portions. Do I make sense? So it depends. Also, it's a win-win situation either way. Are you willing to pay a large amount of money at the beginning of the year? Are you willing to pay first semester and second semester, breaking down the two semesters? But what I can tell you is students that are at UNAM, for instance, that pay registration fees once off, it's easier for them in terms of coming up with the amount, but also in terms of administratively. So NUST students may struggle because you have to come up with an amount such as 4,500, for instance, especially self-funded students in the middle of the year, as opposed to saving up last year, whatever the case may be, you pay it off in January. But it also becomes tedious administratively for our students to register every single semester. We've had cases where students could not register the second semester at NUST, for instance, because of financial constraints, but also the administrative nature of the registration. Be it they did not get a chance to register within the cap, or they did not raise the money within the cap of the registration period, and as a result, they could not finish or could not register in time. So that is an alarming situation that we find ourselves observing. But what I can agree with you, what I can say is NANSO has been pushing for a reform. And unfortunately, or fortunately enough, we are receiving free tertiary education as from next year, public institutions. So what I can guarantee our students is this issue will be done away with because of the government's efforts to ensure that there's free tertiary education. So the nightmare of coming up with those amounts that hopefully by next year is no longer going to exist.
What feedback has NANSO received from students regarding the burden of registering and paying deposits twice a year?
I think the biggest feedback is it's costly, number one. You have a fixed time period as to when you should come up with this amount and you need to pay and register. And that is a challenge for our students because you may not raise the money within that period. You already hustled in January to get that money out of the way, and you're doing it again in July, in the middle of the year, I must say. So obviously our students struggle with that. But beyond that, I've mentioned also the administrative nature of it, trying to register within the time frame you're given, on top of possibly maybe having second opportunity exams, or your examination results are withheld. So it's a back and forth situation that our students struggle with. But what I can say is, for some students it works, because remember I gave an example of UNAM, where you pay once off. So for some students this setup works for them, and for some it doesn't work.
Yes, and has NANSO formally engaged with NUST leadership to discuss alternatives to the current registration and fee structure?
Yes, definitely. NANSO is set up in such a way where we have branches at every institution of higher learning. So our branches that are in the institutions, or specifically NUST, play a critical role in championing some of these issues. But beyond that, NANSO has a very good relationship with the SRC, and we've been channeling some of these issues, or we've been holding hands with the SRC collectively to address these issues, to say these are the issues that our students are facing. But like I said, it's a complex issue. So 50% of the students would want to register once off, 50% would want to do it beginning of the year and in the middle of the year. So it's a complex situation.
And what short-term interventions does NANSO believe could help students with outstanding balance that wants to continue their studies now?
I think the question becomes a bit very difficult to answer. And I say it's difficult to answer primarily because if things go well, as young people say, this is the last time we're going to experience this issue, because we are anticipating free tertiary education next year that deals with this issue. But beyond that, what the short-term interventions, of course, like I said, payment plans, to say an agreement between the SRC and the management in terms of how students can pay, to say, okay, fine, students can't afford it now, perhaps allow them to enter into some sort of debt agreement, to say, I'm going to pay it over a period of 6 months in this and that installment. So that is one of the short-term interventions. Beyond that, we would be lying if we sell our students the dream of saying, look, we're able to fight tooth and nail to ensure that these registration fees are done away with now, So we would be lying to our students. But the most feasible short-term intervention now is just the payment plan.
And in the long run, what changes is NANSO advocating for students to make higher education at NUST and other institutions more financially accessible and student-friendly?
I think the question is self-answered, or has been answered by what I've mentioned earlier in terms of free tertiary education. So that's a long-run plan already that exists, to say the ministry and government, by extension, starting from 2026, is going to ensure that there's free tertiary education at institutions of higher learning. So I think that in all deals with the issues of funding and registration and all that. But I think to answer in terms of private institutions, the ministry and the government has promised that that particular policy will be able to extend on to private institutions.